Hello, and welcome to this, our 44th live stream, where we take your questions on ancient Egypt and the Bible. We're going to get into it tonight, pretty much immediately, because we've got a full stack of questions already. But keep the questions coming. It's nice to see good questions. And the rules are the same as always. Super chats have priorities. If you are not going to give a super chat, which is perfectly fine, we do take non-super chat questions too. We do ask that you preface your question with a Q and a colon so that I know it's directed to me. I ask that you only list your question once, so as I scan through, I can see which ones I've taken. And I also ask that if it's about a Bible verse or a foreign word, that you tell me, give me where book and chapter and verse, or what you think the word means, so I have a little bit of context to go on. So with that said, we're going to take a few non-super chats first, and then we'll get into the super chats. And our first question is actually not directed to me directly, but I think it's relevant. Oh boy, this is from ex-fanboy Saved by Jesus. Oh boy, can't wait to hear the context behind this title. LMAO.
Someone person just asked that too.
Okay. Well, it turns out that our dear friends, the Atheists, have this little top 10 list. And in that top 10 list is the top 10 Christian apologists that they consider most likely to become atheists. And I was on that list. Apparently, Michael Jones of Inspiring Philosophy was also on that list. But I did make the list. Voted most likely to become an atheist. Yeah, I wouldn't hold your breath on that one. that ain't happening. It is a very backhanded compliment, absolutely. I mean, they're basically saying we think you're so smart that you'll eventually come to your senses, give up this whole religion thing, and join the atheists. But no, it's not gonna happen. I've just seen too much crazy stuff that I don't have the kind of faith to be an atheist. I just don't have that kind of faith. So while it is a backhanded compliment, and I am actually flattered. I am actually flattered that they think that much of me, that they think I will become, that they've made me an honorary atheist. But yeah, not happening. So that's the origin of tonight's title. So I hope you found that interesting. Okay. Next non-super chat. Okay, from Mark Chanul. What would you argue is a major contributing factor to the growth of atheism? Oh boy. I would argue it is the lack of biblical literacy and poor understanding of context, both historical and story-wise. I can't say you're wrong there. Biblical literacy and poor understanding of context does play a part in this. But I do think, too, that the rise of American fundamentalism is also playing a huge part of it. And and really, it's not so much what fundamentalism believes. It's the method fundamentalism teaches. And I want to be very, very careful here, okay? Because I'm actually not against fundamentalism per se. I have actually very, very little beef with what any denomination teaches. But the problem is if in your churches and in your seminaries and all that, you teach people that there's only one way to interpret the Bible, and that's the problem. If there's one way to interpret any particular verse, all it takes is something to contradict that, and they don't have the mental toolkit to be flexible enough. There's I think it's an old Buddhist saying, the reed that doesn't bend breaks. And I think that's what we have a lot in say, American fundamentalism, is that there's this in addition to biblical literacy, a lack of biblical literacy, a poor understanding of context, I'd say a rampant emotionalism, a hyper-emotionalist perspective. And I'll add one more to that. Untested discipleship. I think untested discipleship plays a huge factor in this too. If you're in that bubble and that's the only view you get, and you're suddenly forced to leave that bubble where your discipleship has now become tested, then I think one very rapidly breaks. Today's atheism is very, very different from, say, the atheism of, say, a few generations ago. It's exceptionally different. The products of atheism a few generations ago, they were essentially the products of broken homes. One way through other, through divorce or through the father, dying when the children were very young. So there was that sociological atheism a few generations ago. But we're seeing a new kind of atheism today. We're seeing a kind of atheism that isn't asking the questions of atheists of the past. They're asking new questions. They're asking different questions. They already have an idea. A lot of them have an idea, preconceived notion of what the Bible says, even if it's not accurate. And again, boils down to that. Biblical literacy, poor understanding of context, untested discipleship, that one meaning hermeneutic, and add hyper emotionalism into that mix, and you've got a toxic combination. And I think that's right now most of the cause of the rampant growth of atheism is internal to the church. It really is internal. So this is a very serious topic. I'm definitely not joking about this, because I think it's probably one of the greatest challenges we face in the church today, is we're creating our own opposition. We're creating our own people who basically fight us all the time, just because they were one of us, and we didn't teach them, we didn't disciple them. And now we're living with the consequences of that lack of discipleship. So I don't want to get too heavy at the beginning of the show, but I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the question. Okay. We have another question from Adonis Jackson. Derek Gilbert says that the divine name Yahoo was found at Mount Ebal and dated to the 14th to 13th century BC. Is that true? If so, how well does this align with your Exodus date? Okay. I did an entire video just last night on this subject, and it's posted, and it's called The Manna Machine. Hey, honey, could you take the link to the Manna Machine and video and post it in the live? Okay. I'm not encouraging you to go off and view it now, but after, copy the link, and after the show live stream's over, go watch the Manna Machine where we talk about this in detail. Okay. Now this is a finding that comes out of actually ABR, Associates for Biblical Research, and I have talked about this about Associates for Biblical Research and their shenanigans many times on this channel. And there's enough room here to be very, very cautious about this finding. Okay. They haven't released the high resolution RTI images, so we can't verify this finding. The other thing, at least not to verify the description yet. The other thing is that date is really hinky. It's really hinky. Everything we find at Mount Evel dates from let's say a late Bronze 2B, the transition from late Bronze 2B to Iron Age 1. Okay, so that's roughly 1200 BC to 1100 BC. Okay, everything we find there. Well, ABR makes this announcement that, oh, this little amulet, oh, it dates to the 14th, 15th century. Oh, you know, the transition from late Bronze 1B to 2A. Well, how do you get that? How do they get that? Well, paleography. Well, who was their paleographer? Peter van der Veen. Peter van der Veen is an early date advocate. An early advocate with a history of very, very dubious epigraphy. He was the guy responsible for, confirming Manfred Gorg's interpretation of the Berlin pedestal. So he's got a tendency to early date things much, much earlier than they actually are. You know, like on the Berlin pedestal. You know, van der Veen dated the Berlin pedestal to Amenhotep II. Well, today, most Egyptologists would say that dates to Ramses II. So, you've got sort of the perfect storm here of but potentially an incredible discovery with no oversight and methodology, a whole bunch of guys with a vested interest in supporting the early date, even when it goes against Adam Zertel's own findings and the findings of the diggers at the site, you know, the lead archaeologists, you know. And Stripling is not a great historian. I mean, he's got some really bad history of bad historical methods. So, I think that, you know, and frankly, the fill that they sorted here out, there is no trace of any evidence that that's 14th to 13th century BC. Just no trace of that. So, you know, this is wishful thinking. I mean, it really is. They've got no warrant for saying that. So anyway, I hope that answered the question. Again, check out the Man Machine Alert video, and you'll get a lot more information on the critical issues behind the amulet here, and why we should approach this really with a lot of caution. Okay.
This URL is the right way?
Yeah, I think that looks right. Yeah, that looks correct, I think. You can test it and see if it shows up, but okay. And we also have our last introductory non-super chat. It comes from St. Luke. Okay, and he asks, how approximately old do you think Moses was when he was exiled from Egypt, and how old when he returned? Since 40 is probably used symbolically. Yes, it is probably used symbolically. He was probably in his either late teens or early 20s when he left Egypt, and this is based upon the idea that there really was no fear of Egypt being invaded until the war between the Hittites got started, and that got started at the reign of King Ai. Okay, so that's going to set a certain clock here to sort of get things going. So he's going to be around age 19 to roughly 20, 22, 23. So he's going to be in that sort of ballpark. So then he goes off, and then he goes and he sojourns, and then probably returns roughly around, I would say, 15 to 25 years later, roughly. So I think there's some room. We don't know for sure, but that's sort of the rough estimates. So he was probably around 40-ish on his return, roughly 35 to 40 when he came back to Egypt. So that makes it so that when he does actually finally reach his life's end, he was probably around 80 to 90. So that's sort of the ballpark we're talking about here. So anyway, I hope that answered the question. Thank you very much for the question. Very interesting question, so I had to take it. Okay, let's start with the super chats. Okay, our first super chat comes from Brick Creation for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. If Amenhotep Ramses II's firstborn body had a broken skull, could this mean that the destroyer used a weapon to kill him? Was it an entity? Okay. Here's the place where we need to be really, really careful about certain findings. These were not findings announced that went through peer review. These were findings that were announced in a newspaper. And here's the issue. Basically, in KV5, there's a pit. And in that pit, they found the remains of 4 skeletons. Not all of them complete. So it's not like they found the mummy of Amenhotep. Okay? And he goes also by other names too, like Sethir as well. Okay? And he was Ramses II's firstborn son. Now, this is where things get really, really dicey, because all the excavators had here, Kent Weeks excavation had, was a skull with a piece broken. Okay, now the question is, how did that skull get the wound, and was it on campaign? Probably not on campaign. It was probably not on campaign. And the reason why it's probably not on campaign was that Amenhotep was alive after the final campaign of Ramses II, which took place in Ramses II's 18th regnal year. Amenhotep lived until roughly the 25th regnal year. So he's alive after the last campaign. Second of all, it's not really clear if that skull actually belonged to Amenhotep at all. There's no evidence at all that connects that skull to that person. This could have been the son of a minor king. A son of a minor queen. Okay, who would not have been eligible for the throne, but preceded the death of Amenhotep. There's other reasons that could have explained how that tomb was, how that skull got there either. It could have been one of the other children of Ramses II that got, killed in military training exercises by accident. Maybe a jealous lover, knocked off that particular person. The thing is, there's no mummy wrappings there. There's no identification of that skull. It was just assumed. It's one of those things that's thrown out as a possibility. Well, it could be Amenhotep's skull. Don't have any evidence for it. Mr. Empty Conjecture would really love this. This is one of those things where, Mr. Empty Conjecture should be popping up his head and saying, "Could be." He's over there. Let me guess. Everyone wants me to get Mr. Empty Conjecture. All right. I'll get Mr. Empty Conjecture out. So, Mr. Empty Conjecture, is this skull really the skull of of Amahir Kopchev? Could be. Yeah, so we don't know if it's actually his skull. Maybe, maybe not. But it is probably one of the children of Ramses II. But there was 120 of those children. Probably a male. So, one of the 60. So, take it. That's probably as close as we're going to get with this. So anyway, thank you for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. And I hope that answered the question. Okay, the next super chat is also from Brick Creation for $2. Thank you very much for the super chat. Any news regarding the conquest, the Jericho conquest? Nothing new since Lorenzo Nigro's 2020 report. Excavations are still going on at Jericho right now. We might get a 2021 report, I hope. I hope we get a 2021 report. Or, sorry, a 2022 report. But who knows? We don't know when the next sort of update from Jericho is going to come. They don't always come on a reliable basis. I wish they did, honestly. But as far as I know, Nigros is the last one that we have so far. So, fortunately, we just have to wait. Sorry about that. But thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. Okay, super chat number 3, also from Brick Creation for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Did Jesus hint of an abomination of desolation that would be similar to Antiochus IV's persecution of believers putting an idol of Zeus in the temple? Well, he did a lot more than that. He slaughtered a pig on the altar. Okay, it's more than just the idol. It's also the slaughtering of the pig. It was a total defilement. It was a total defilement of the temple. So there's a lot sort of more that went on with Antiochus IV, to the extent that Antiochus called himself Epiphanes. He got a revelation. He got an epiphany. So he's Antiochus Epiphanes. Well, the Jews have a way of twisting names. They called him Antiochus Epimanes. Antiochus Madman. Call him a madman. It is true that the events of Antiochus IV really weighed heavily upon, say, the Jewish mindset and apocalypticism. They very much weighed heavily on that, such that almost any interpretation was almost seen through the lens of Antiochus IV. Okay, so it is very much when like, for example, when the rabbis start talking about the book of Daniel, they're going to see it through rabbinic Judaism is going to see it through that Antiochus light. So. Yeah, it's definitely there's definitely more going on there than just the idol, although the idol is desecration enough. In fact, one of the interesting things is the reason we have to remember the reason why there were money changers at the temple in the time and life of Jesus was to prevent an abomination from happening. Because one of the rules of the temple is you're not allowed to bring a human image, a graven image, onto the Temple Mount. Well, if you've got a quarter in your pocket, that is a graven image. Okay? Because it has the face of a monarch on it. Or a ruler. So, what the money changers did, the whole purpose of the money changers was to take Roman currency from other countries that had images of their sovereigns on it, and exchange it for currency that did not have the image of a king on it. So, what we do here, it was very interesting about this, is when Jesus is on the Temple Mount and, they start asking, the Jews start asking him, do we pay taxes to Caesar? Do we pay taxes to Caesar? And he says, does anyone here have a coin? They're on the Temple Mount. No one should be having a coin with a face on it. And this guy whips out a coin and gives it to Jesus, and Jesus looks. He says, whose image do you see on this? It says Caesar's. And he goes, give to Caesar what's Caesar's, give to God what's God's. That's basically, he's sort of telling them, hey, you all got coins in your pocket. You shouldn't be having them on the Temple Mount. That's toevo. That is abomination. It's forbidden. And yet, here they are doing it. So yeah, Jesus is dropping these little hints of the abomination of desolation actually throughout the Gospels. Okay, and they're none of them are quite as explicit as say like Matthew 25 or Mark. I think it's 13 off the top. I can't remember off the top of the head. I think it's 13, but it is. Jesus is acutely aware of not just the big abominations, but also the little ones as well. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. And interesting question. Yeah, for super chat, also from Brick Creation. Can Ezekiel 40 be a third temple? It's one possible interpretation of this passage. It seems too well designed to be symbolic. For example, Ezekiel 44, 26 to 27, mentioning purging the altar, maybe because of Revelation 13 to 15. Zechariah 14, 16 seems to allude to a future temple. Thanks. Well, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Now, the Ezekiel 40 pericope is actually very expansive. It covers not just Ezekiel 40, but several other passages, several other chapters after that too. So it's not actually practical to go through the whole thing. And many scholars have had many different views of this passage. Okay, so there isn't just one view of this passage. Some have suggested that this is a third temple, and some have suggested that this may be a heavenly temple. I don't know about I don't know about the heavenly temple interpretation. It does seem to have some mytho-historical constructs in it. For example, it talks about Ezekiel being taken atop a high mountain, where God is, So, there is some sort of mythological underpinnings going on here. But yet, the dimensions of that he measures of this temple are actually very reasonable. They're actually smaller than the Herodian temple. So it's not like this is the big, grandiose, final temple. So there's something that's, it seems that there's both something divine about it and something very earthly about it as well. And this is why it's become such a controversial subject. Because you'll get interpretations that are all across the map here. You'll have people who say that this is the final, temple where the Antichrist places the abomination of desolation. Which you kind of need a third temple if you're going to have an abomination that makes desolate, because otherwise you can't have a holy place. If you don't have a holy place, you can't do an abomination. So, there is that aspect. There's also, though, the idea that this could be something, say, even beyond the third temple, perhaps even a rebuilt fourth temple, So, there's a lot here it's a very complicated passage. This is not something that can be really easily answered, because you have so many people having so many opinions on this passage, and the passage is so long it's really hard to keep it all straight. So that's probably the best I can do in sort of this particular forum. We might do a series at some point on eschatology, and might go through passages like this. But that's also a big undertaking too. So anyway, I want to thank you for the super chat. I very much appreciate it. I know that's, saying it for sure is the third temple is not a satisfying answer. And unfortunately, sometimes the answer is, well, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. We don't know yet. Prophecy's kind of like that. You really don't know until it's fulfilled. So, thank you very much for the super chat. I very much appreciate it. Oh, I see a lot of people want me to do that series on eschatology. Oh boy. I think I've started something.
I'll let in.
And we also have a fifth super chat from Brick Creation for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Would 2 Timothy 3:16 and 17 and John 10:35 mean that there are no contradictions in the original scriptures? All right, I'm just going to pull up the Bible here, and I'm going to go to 2 Timothy. Bible here. Just for in case someone is not familiar with this. 3:16 to 17. Okay. All scripture is breathed out by God and is profitable for teaching, for reproof, for correction, and for training in righteousness, that the man of God may be competent and equipped for every good work. Okay. So basically, this is a statement basically saying that essentially the whole controversy around this this passage is the adjective God breathed. And theologians have been debating, what does God breathed actually mean? Yeah, there's a whole lot there there's a long theological debate here. But one of the interpretations is that it is divinely inspired, that there's an element of absolute truth to that. Now, the book of John, the Gospel of John, chapter 10. Here. John chapter 10, 35. All right, and this is actually a reference to Psalm 82, where he says starts in verse 34. Jesus answered them, "Is it not written in your law, I said you are gods? If he called them gods to whom the word of God came, and scripture cannot be broken, do you say of him whom the Father consecrated and sent into the world, you are blaspheming because I said, I am the Son of God?" Okay. The critical passage here is, and scripture cannot be broken. Now, there are people here that will say that and scripture cannot be broken was a later gloss. I think a lot of New Testament scholars have sort of backed away from that now. A lot of them seem to think that's original John now. I mean, but it used to be in like older commentaries that they would say that this is a scribal gloss that was just sort of inserted in. It doesn't seem to be a scribal gloss now, from what we know from of the papyrus. But with that said, however, it does raise a critical issue that, well, what is being actually meant here by broken? Broken, say, intellectually, that something won't come to pass is the immediate context. So basically, if Scripture says something will come to pass, or Scripture affirms something, then that is the basically the idea that the Bible is inerrant in what it affirms. Okay, so this is not to say. We have to understand that what we mean here by no contradictions is no contradictions in what the Bible absolutely affirms. This is not saying that the Bible cannot record the mistakes people say. Okay, and this is a bit of nuance here, so you kind of have to follow along here. Let's say we have somebody in the Bible who's an inveterate liar. Ananias and Sapphira, for example. Oh, did you sell the land? Oh, this is all I got for it. Well, are Ananias and Sapphira actually saying, hey, this is the sum of money? By the way, this is in Acts 5. This is the actual sum of money that you got. And Ananias and Sapphira say, oh, of course this is all we got, where they're holding back some of the money when they promised it all. In this particular case, what Ananias and Sapphira are saying is absolutely false. It's untrue. It's a lie. But yet the Bible accurately records the lie without affirming the lie. The Bible is completely capable of recording things that are not true in a truthful manner. We see this, for example, where in Judges chapter, I think it's chapter 11, where Jephthah, he's trying diplomacy and he botches it. He says several things that are factually incorrect. Well, the Bible is not affirming what Jephthah is saying. What the Bible is doing there is it is truthfully recording what Jephthah is saying. And this is where I think we sometimes go beyond what, say, inerrancy actually means. So inerrancy here means that in the originals, which is sometimes called the Apocrypha, that the Bible has no contradictions in what it affirms in the original autographs. And definitely these two passages would support that point of view. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated, and great question. Okay, take that down. All right, and now we're on to Twidget here, and we got a whole bunch of super chats just queued up. So let's just get right into it. All right, David. I'm sorry if I butcher this, but Amez, I hope Amez. For $20. Thank you very much for the super chat. I very much appreciate it. I do try to get people's names right. So if you do leave, if I did butcher it, please leave a pronunciation guide in the chat, live stream, so I can correct myself next time, because I do want to get people's names right. You've been so generous to us. We want to make sure we honor your name properly. And he says, hi, Dr. Falk. Does the text of Genesis 7:21-23 indicate that God completely wiped out the humanity to the extent there would be no trace of their existence after the waters subsided? Okay, well, let's take a look at that passage and see. So I am going to go here to Genesis chapter 7, verses 21. Okay, and let's get the Bible up there. Okay, and I'm going to read from verse 20. The water prevailed 15 cubits higher, and the mountains were covered, and all flesh that moved on the earth perished, birds and cattle and beasts and every swarming thing that swarms upon the earth and all mankind. And all that was on the dry land, and all in whose nostrils was the breath of life, the breath of the spirit of life, died. Thus he blotted out every living thing that was on the face of the land, from man to animals to creeping things to birds of the sky, and they were blotted out from the earth, and only Noah was left together with those who were with him in the ark. Okay. It appears that the word that's probably an issue here, which is blotted out, is the Hebrew makah. It's makah. Now, what we have to understand about makah is it's not blotting out so as to leave no trace. It's more to wipe out as in to extinguish. Okay? So it's kind of, think of it like this. Think of it this way. Think of it like a candle that's burning. And it burns for a long time. And then you just puff it out. It's that sort of sense. Okay? So, I do get the sense from this passage. The passage is trying to indicate that God did wipe out all of humanity. I mean, it's clear that that the purpose was to extinguish basically all life on land, essentially, and start over. This is the reset button. So, I don't think it is. I don't think it has the connotation of not leaving any trace. I don't think it goes quite that far. I think that's sort of overreading the text. And I think one of the things we have to be always cautious of when we sort of read the Bible is to make sure we're not overreading the text. And there's several ways we can overread the text. And I probably should do a video just on the problem of overreading text, because it is something I do come across a lot. Like, for example, I hear a lot of people, read the storage cities of Pithom and Ramses and think that they overread it to imply that it's the entire cities of Ramses and Pithom. No, that's an overreading of the text. I think here to say that this blotting out of every living thing is overreading the text, because it's not saying blotting out their trace, it's blotting out their lives. Okay? So,
But that being said, the flood would wipe out.
that being said, however, it's very, very possible that it might, kill everyone and not leave a trace, of humanity. So that could still be, that could still happen, even though the text itself doesn't indicate that. But as a careful exegete, I would, caution not to read too much into the text. But there's enough there to read into it already that would suggest that all sort of life on land, as far as basically, animals, birds, people that breathe there. So that seems to be what the text implies. Now, there is other views on this as well. Like, for example, John Walton has a more of a mytho-historical view of this, where he tends to more towards a local flood hypothesis. I have not decided on this issue yet. I've not decided yet whether I support a local flood or a global flood hypothesis. I still lean towards the global flood hypothesis. But, again, I have not looked into this far enough to make a final determination. So, anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate. Very generous super chat too. Thank you very much. Okay. Andrew Goulet for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. In 1 Kings 19:15, God tells Elijah to go to Syria and anoint Hazael as king. What was the political situation like that a Jewish prophet could walk into a Syrian palace and anoint a new king? Okay. It is an excellent question. And let's just bring that up here, because that is actually an excellent question. So, okay, and I'll bring that up. I'll start at verse 14. And then he said, I have been very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, for the sons of Israel have forsaken thy covenant, torn down thy altars, and killed thy prophets with the Lord. And I alone am left, and they seek my life to take it away. Ooh. And the Lord said to him, Go, return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus. And when you have arrived, you shall anoint Hazael king over Aram. And actually, we probably just stop right there. Okay, so what's going on right now? is what we have politically at the time is the Neo-Hittite kingdoms basically occupying the northern Levant. So essentially Turkey, parts of Lebanon, Iran, which is Syria, these are all part of, say, the Neo-Hittite states. Basically the old Hittite empire that just sort of fell apart. In the case of Iran, you also had a mix too of the Mitanni. The Mitanni were absorbed into the Hittite Empire, and when the Hittite Empire fell apart, it too broke apart into the Hittite states. Now, what's going on here politically is that Israel's prophets are being persecuted. They are being executed. Elijah is being targeted by what's her name now? Jezebel. Jezebel is basically taking her. She's the daughter of the king of Tyre. She brought Baal worship into Israel, and with him, her prophets of Baal, and they basically went on this purge to kill all the prophets of Yahweh. So basically, God is telling him, you know what? Go over to Syria, appoint a king over Aram, and Aram is one of the big enemies of Israel. I mean, it's a cousin state, but it's also an enemy of Israel. And basically, he's telling him to do this because Aram is going to come back and persecute the northern kingdom of Israel. It's going to be trouble. So, basically, God is sending Elijah over to Aram to put the right guy on the throne to extract some payback. So, that's what's going on in the context here. So, anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. Interesting question. But so you see, you've got this nice little sort of perfect storm between Israel's disobedience and an ascendancy of a stronger Aramean kingdom that was fractured under the Neo-Hittite states. So that's what's going on politically. So that's why he's going over there. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. Okay. Theologia for $4.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. What are the views of Manfred Beatalk on the Exodus and the overall historicity of the biblical sources? Wow. They change. Manfred Beatalk is a little, how do I say this? A little odd, his views. Early on in his career, he believed that the Hyksos expulsion, were basically, he held the memorial view of the Israelite Exodus. Basically when the Hyksos left Avaris, that Exodus was remembered in the social memory of Israel. He then said, okay, well, maybe it occurred, after into the 11th century, and he kind of later on followed more, say, late biblical trends. Oh yeah, okay, maybe the Israelites, they in the 8th and 9th century, got a view of sort of the idea of Exodus, natively. And then he gets to, say, certain portions of his excavation at Avaris, and then he goes, well, you know what? We're starting to see Avaris abandoned in Dynasty 19, well, maybe this is something that's, not as late as the 9th century. Now, maybe it's more, 11th century or 12th century. And I think today, he's settled more on basically a Ramesside Exodus. So he has some very funny views about the Bible. But you know, he said to me once. I mean, I was talking to BTAC once at an Azor conference, and you know, at this particular Azor conference, you know, which happened, this particular session of the papers was actually on the Exodus, and I gave a paper on the Ark of the Covenant, and you know, at the end of the whole session, they kept the questions to the very end. At the very end, you know, we all got, you know, reamed by Bill Deaver, who was at that point still, you know, very, very sort of aggressive in his particular sort of brand of semi-biblical minimalism. But after that, directly after that, you know, the session was over, and I met Manfred Beatalk for the first time. And I was standing there with James Hoffmeyer, and Hoffmeyer, you know, asks Beatalk, well, you know, what do you think about the Bible? You know, what do you think about the Exodus? And Beatalk says, well, of course the Exodus happened, because the Bible says it did. Now, this is a very interesting view. You know, this was in 2017, so, you know, it's, you know, his views are very fluid. His views are very fluid. But I think that's sort of where he is right now. So, anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, and we got 501 Mobius here for $10. Thank you very much. Good to see you tonight here. Okay, what do you think about the modern Book of Jasher? I have read parts of it, and I think it's hokum. I think it's hokum, too. Yeah. Contradictions and impossible stories, and probably coming out of I would say late medieval Enlightenment sort of context. It does seem to be something that's of European manufacture. So I don't think it's genuine. I just don't. I've got some serious doubts about its authenticity. You know, there's several of these sort of pseudepigraphal works, and pseudepigrapha is just a way of saying a book that's ascribed to a person with a false name. You know, like for example, Book of Enoch. Enoch didn't write the Book of Enoch. Okay, and there's even some question as to whether or not, like for example, Second Enoch, I think it is, you know, is also probably a medieval recreation as well. But in the case of Book of Jasher, I don't think we have a preserved version of the Book of Jasher. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. I don't think I can comment much more on that, but it does. I don't see this as I say a credible. I mean, it's hard to take any pseudepigraphal book as credible, but I think the Book of Jasher is less so. It's not the ancient Book of Jasher. That much we know. It's not the same Book of Jasher that's referred to in the Old Testament. So, at least I think it's the Old Testament where it refers to it. I'd have to look that up. It's either the Old Testament, or maybe it's one of some. I think it's the Old Testament. Someone will correct me on this. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 5 Shushi for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Were Dorothy Eady's contributions to Egyptology significant? Some say her discoveries lend credence to her claims of having reincarnated from there. Is this Seti? Is this just another name for Seti? Let me just look that up, because I think. Yeah, that's Seti. I knew I recognized that name. Okay. Seti. How do we explain her? Wow. Okay. Seti. She's called that the Arabic was the mother of Seti, as in King Seti. Okay. Being Arabic for mother. Okay. Now, Seti was quite a character. She's been dead many years now, but she was how do I say this? An eccentric. Yeah, she was an eccentric, and she was a bit of an occultist. She was from England. Okay. Sort of got into that wave of late 19th, early 20th century occultism. Believed she was a reincarnated mother of a king, and then basically moved to Abydos, Egypt, where she sort of hung out at Abydos. And, she did do a lot of work on the temple of Seti I at Abydos. Okay? So, she's not really, she wasn't she was more of a, how do I say this? She was more of a conservationist than really an academic. Okay? But people would see her all the time when they went to the Temple of Seti I at Abydos. So she was really a fixture there. And Abydos is a small town. It's not a big town where, somebody like her doesn't stand out. So, I'm not sure how big her discoveries were. We don't really talk about her much in Egyptology anymore, except as more of a, as an eccentric. We do have some women in Egyptology that made much greater contributions to the field than Seti ever did. Like, for example, Bertha Porter. I mean, she made an incredible contribution to the field with her what's it called now? We call it in the field Porter and Moss. It's actually two women who wrote that, and it basically is a catalog of all the monuments of ancient Egypt. It's a bibliography of monuments. So, we do have some giants in Egyptology that are women. Really big giants who've contributed significantly to this field. But Seti was not one of those. She was kind of more of a. She was an eccentric. It's not, but she lived a long time. She would give tours at the Temple of Abydos. She would probably pitch her reincarnation stuff, and tourists loved her. Tourists thought she was fantastic. And she was very knowledgeable. But I wouldn't say she was a huge contributor to the field overall. Okay? So, anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay. And now we got an extremely generous super chat from Sinaiticus Apologia for $100. Thank you so much. That's a great gift. We really appreciate it. That really helps us. And it helps keep our channel going, helps us produce videos. Just fantastic, wonderful gift. Thank you so much. And he writes, I've read that a name for one of the Egyptian moon gods is Yah. Is it possible that this figure has any connection with the God of Israel? Okay. It isn't Yah. It's Yak. Okay? It is an eye an aleph, and I believe it's a .h. It isn't Yah. And here's the problem. I've heard this too, and you do see like people in the conscious community sometimes use this to try to say, you know, Yahweh comes from this moon god Yah, but it isn't Yah. It doesn't transliterate that way. The transliteration, if this was a transliteration of Yah, we would expect to find something like a double reed leaf with maybe a vulture aleph, but then a house hieroglyph for a normal H. So that's what we should expect if it really was Yah. But the moon god here is actually Yak. And that's a different pronunciation, different consonants, and it doesn't translate. The rules of transliteration between Egyptian and Hebrew just don't quite work that way. So I don't think there's any possibility here that the moon god here is tied to the God of Israel. Furthermore, the other issue is that the moon god is he's a very peripheral figure. Okay, he's actually not a well-known god in Egypt. He's kind of a really, really minor figure. You know, there's actually a much more important moon gods in Egypt, by a long shot. In fact, you could even kind of say that he's almost like the moon equivalent of the Aten. You know, it's the moon disk more than anything else. But like Khonsu, the child of Amun-Re and Mut. No, he was a moon god, and he was a really, really important moon god. So, you know, when you've got this minor figure and this major moon god, then you'd have to kind of ask the question, well, if the Israelites were worshiping a moon god, why didn't they go for the big guy? You know, why didn't they go worship Khonsu? You know, that's a real question, especially for a god that's this peripheral. And Yak is not a Semitic god. It's not a Semitic god. So I think this is really stretching things. So I hope that answers your question. We are so thankful for your super chat. What an incredibly generous super chat, and we really appreciate it. It does help us keep the lights on, and I just can't thank you enough for that. So anyway, thank you very much. Okay, Andrew Goulet for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. What is the difference in meaning between the name Abraham and the name Abraham after God renames him? Okay, wow, that's... I did know... I'd have to go and... Let's see here. Ab is father, and basically he is father. Abraham is father of nations. Okay? Basically, Abraham. Okay? So, basically, he is father to father of nations. So, that's sort of the difference in meaning, as I best recall it. Okay? So, again, I get going back into my memory, trying to process that, but that's how I best recall what the difference is here. So, so anyway, simple enough. And this is also tied with the promise, you know, where God promises, I will make you the father of many nations. And that's where he gets the name Abraham from. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. And good question. Okay. And Moise Salazar for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. Hi, Dr. Falk. Do you think that Dawkins is disingenuous? Yes. But that's not very qualified, you know. He said that faith is a delusion. If there were the case, he should be calling Guinness first collective and simultaneous delusion ever. Well, yeah. A lot of what Dawkins says is really just polemic. It's really just polemic. When you get sort of right down to the core of his objections, there's not a lot of substance there. There are a lot of hyperbolic language. There are a lot of polemic. Now you can argue that that's disingenuous, or is it just she's trying to convince? He's trying to convince. He's trying to do hedge protection. He's trying to give atheists a reason not to believe. Okay, all of that, as far as I'm concerned, is fair game as far as when it comes from an atheist. Okay, so I just think he's doing what atheists do. So, I do think the whole there is one aspect of his polemic that I think is really dangerous. Dangerous is the right word. Where he says, you're either, if you believe in God, you're either, uneducated, he had three ways of putting this: uneducated, delusional, or just evil. Okay. Anytime you start calling people you disagree with evil or bad actors, and they're not being intentionally bad actors, you're then marginalizing people. And I think that's one of the problems I have with Dawkins is he has a marginalizing effect on the people who follow him. So, so you do find in, say, atheist polemic, people where, well, they say, they're just being evil. If they're ignorant. Okay, they're ignorant. Well, that's not very nice either, because frankly, a lot of people who believe in God aren't ignorant. Well, then they're delusional. Well, you know what? Where does Dawkins get? Is Dawkins suddenly a mental health specialist? How does he know what people's mental state is? He's not a mental. He's a research biologist. He's an evolutionary biologist. He's not a mental health professional. He can't judge if somebody is delusional. So then he jumps to evil. Well, now he's supposed to be, now he's playing the role of theologian. How's he to determine what's good or evil based upon what someone believes? So I think that particular aspect of his polemic is quite dangerous, and I think it has done a lot to poison the discourse between people of faith and people of non-faith. And I'm all for having conversations with people who don't hold the same beliefs as I do. I think there's a lot to be. You can learn things from atheists. I think you can have friendly conversations with atheists. Heck, before I went to seminary, most of my friends were atheists, honestly. I had very few Christian friends. And I had many a good time with them. So, it's just, I think this has just sort of poisoned the discourse. And I see that Dawkins has sort of set the standard for new atheism as to how discourse is to progress. It's meant to be much more polemic based. It's meant to create partisanship between theists and non-theists. And his polemic is almost more, it's more heat than light. It's more heat than light. It's not serious debate. So, of course, his little debate with the Archbishop of Canterbury, that was priceless. Absolutely priceless. Absolutely priceless. But that's a story for another time. So, anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. Sentinel Apologetics. It was good to be on your live chat today for $2. Thank you very much for the super chat. The pattern of the temple involves sperma. Oh, yeah. When I heard that today, it was just like, no. He's here talking about one of the teachings of Michael Petro. Hey, you could use the same sort of, as I said to him earlier today, you can use the same sort of, methodology towards, Michael Petro's name. Oh, Petro? Well, that comes from the word for rock. Well, it's obviously from the word petroleum. Petra, rock, oleum, greasy. He's a greasy rock. So you can do the same wordplay he does, and it's just sort of it's a really disingenuous way of exegeting the Bible. It's really changing the definition of terms to get brand new definitions out of them. So it's not serious Bible scholarship. It's not serious biblical exegesis. It's basically, he's running a cult. He's running a cult. And, it's dangerous. It's dangerous what he's doing. So I think he's hurt a lot of people, and I think he's continuing to hurt people. And I think he's using them. I think he's using them for his own narcissistic tendencies. So that's all I'm going to say about Petro tonight. But I thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. Good to have you here tonight, brother. Okay. Linguist Ammo for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Good to see you tonight, friend. Hey, Dr. Falk, what do you make of the unlikely theory that Abraham made a covenant treaty with Mesopotamian king like Hammurabi? No. No, he didn't make a treaty with a Mesopotamian king. The Mesopotamian, the War of Kings is essentially Mesopotamian kings that are invading the Levant. There's no evidence that any sort of covenant was cut with a Mesopotamian king. He would have been aware of covenants. He would have been aware of suzerain treaties, because they were everywhere across the ancient Near East. If one thing that Ken Kitchen's treaties, laws, and covenants has shown us is how widespread covenants, suzerain treaties were across the ancient Near East. So, we have them in Hatti. They come. We find them amongst the Hittites. Find them amongst the Egyptians. We find them in Mesopotamian texts. They're everywhere. They're everywhere. So, there's even evidence that they were signed by the Mitanni. So just about every great kingdom of the late Bronze Age had, or even Middle Bronze Age, had some idea of what a suzerain treaty was. So it would have been very, very strange, because one of the things about suzerain treaties too is it wasn't just a treaty between kings. And we have to be very, very careful about that. One of the things about them is that when a suzerain took over a city and forced them to sign, the leader to sign the treaty, all the and they would come and bring the sacrifices, and they would cut the sacrifices in half. Everybody, from the leader of the town to the lowest child, had to walk between the pieces. Everyone was being committed to the treaty. So everyone knew the protocol of suzerain treaties, just because it was just so common in the age. So I don't think that Abraham signed a covenant treaty with a Mesopotamian king, but he certainly would have been aware of these. He would have been very aware of them. Having lived in, say, if for example, if we grant that he was present at Urkesh, there would have definitely been treaties going on back then. It's quite possible that his father signed a Terra of Urkesh. It's probably very, very likely he signed a suzerain vassal treaty. Very likely, because he was ruler of Urkesh. And he was trying to... He had cut a deal with the king of Mari, Zimri Lim. But at the same time, too, the Elamites, the people wanted to go with the Elamites, which they had actually closer cultural affinity to. So I think he would have definitely been aware of it. I don't think he personally signed a treaty with, say, a Mesopotamian king. But Terra almost certainly had. Almost certainly had. Maybe not a Mesopotamian king, but at least a Syrian king. So, anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Interesting question. Okay. Andrew Goulet for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay. Everyone makes a big deal about the fact that Heinrich Schliemann found the mask of Agamemnon. But did he also find a body with the mask? Was it wearing royal regalia? I do not recall the specifics of that excavation, honestly. From what I gather, they didn't find a skeleton there. From what I gather, the skeleton had been eaten away by moisture, so it wasn't a dry tomb. It wasn't like that. So, from what I best guess, a body wasn't found. But back then, too, it's hard to say because people didn't keep the bodies. In the case of Egypt, people kept mummies. People kept mummies because they were also objects of curiosity. They're objects of curiosity. They were often highly painted. They were objects of art in and of themselves. So people kept mummies in the 19th century. In other places, they did not keep human remains. We have this, like for example, from the excavations of Petrie at I think it's El Kab in Abydos. The cemeteries of the kings of dynasties 0 through 2. There's this Petrie writes about how he finds in this second dynasty tomb, which probably was attributed to Qasim Kemwe, a hand with a bracelet, a royal bracelet, a bracelet of the king on it. Okay, just a piece of hand, like a forearm, a skeletal forearm. Okay, a mummified forearm. Probably not natural, not intentionally mummified, but mummified by the sand. Okay, and Petrie writes that he removes the bracelet off the hand and throws the hand into the desert. But that expresses the view that archaeologists of the 19th century had. This is probably the only bodily remain that we would have had that was ever discovered of probably a king from dynasties 0 to 2. And yet he just didn't see any value. For him, it was just a piece of mummified flesh. It just wasn't of interest to him. Now, today, scientists would go nuts over this. There's DNA we can do. There's all sorts of measurements we can do. Biophysiometry. All sorts of crazy stuff that researchers can do today. When this is one of the reasons why we do need to preserve records. Records and as much material as we can, because we don't know what the archaeology of the future will hold. So, as I say, I'm not sure how much Schliemann found as far as the Agamemnon mask is concerned. I'm not sure I'm not sure how much of his stuff he actually wrote up. I don't know how good of a documenter he was, because he is from that era where methodology wasn't so hot. So I can't probably amplify more than that. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. Okay, the Camel Leopard for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Shabbat Shalom. Well, Shabbat Shalom to you too. How should Behemoth be interpreted? Hippo, dinosaur, bovine chaos monster? Okay, not a dinosaur. Not a hippo. Chaos monster. Go with the chaos monster. Yeah. We don't actually have a lot of extra biblical text for Behemoth. There is some suggestion that he could be related to the god of death, like the god of the sea. You know, like Mavet, or not Mavet. No, sorry, the Yom. That he was a sea monster. There's some implication that he might have been that, or the god of death Mut. But it's unclear. It's more clear with Leviathan, because we have, in the case of Leviathan, we do actually have some extra biblical sources, such as the Rosh Hashanah texts at Ugarit that mention an entity very similar to the Leviathan. But Behemoth, we have much less to go on. But I would guess, I think the best guess that we have today, as far as scholars are concerned, is the Chaos Monster, and it does seem to have that sort of that sort of mythological element to it, where God is essentially treating the Chaos Monster as a pet. Yeah, so So yeah, that's probably the best you can do with this is Chaos Monster, until we get more texts that sort of shed more light on this. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, the Camel Leopard for $2. Thank you very much. Very much appreciate the super chat. Which chronology do you use and why? Okay. The chronology I use is actually one that was basically the result of a computer project that I did called the Groundhog Chronology Laboratory. And basically, it's if you were to categorize it, it probably fits into low middle chronology as far as Egyptian chronology goes. It tends to be low on the Mesopotamian side. The reason I use it is because it works best with the synchronisms. Okay, and a synchronism is basically when you have two pieces of data, or data that correlates two kings as being contemporary. Like, for example, the king of Egypt might send a letter to the king of the Hittites. So you get that letter, and if it's got both names on it, and even sometimes even just one name, that can be enough sometimes. That tells you that those two people are contemporary and lived at the same time. Now, the issue is that if you start messing around with chronologies a lot, those synchronisms get out of sync. So you have to have a chronology that basically makes all those synchronisms consistent. And there's about 150 of them, probably actually more like 250 of them, but the project I did cataloged 150 of synchronisms and 500 kings. And then basically we let the computers have their way and basically figure out how it all fits together, essentially. And computers do chronology in ways that human beings can't do. Doing a chronology takes hundreds of thousands of calculations. Hundreds of thousands of calculations. There's no way a human being can do it and not make a mistake. It just can't be done. So, but we also discovered in doing this process that the the chronology is very, very similar to what we would find in the low chronology. Now, the high chronology is just, it's no longer considered to be valid. The high chronology just, flies in the face of, say, the Elamarna texts, especially Elamarna 6. And I don't think it's salvageable. I really don't think the high chronology is salvageable. And at the same time, too, a true middle chronology has also not been exactly shown it's a good candidate for a middle chronology has not really shown itself. And you get into a lot of various chronological issues when you start sort of going down this path. Like, for example, you hear sometimes amateurs, talk about, say the Mesopotamian chronology. Some of them will argue for a middle chronology. Well, one of the interesting things about the middle chronology is it was a compromise. Almost everyone agrees that the middle chronology in Mesopotamia is wrong. Almost everyone agrees about this. They'll debate over whether it's high or low chronology, but no one will accept the middle chronology. And Assyriologists will tell you, well, the middle chronology, well, that's just for textbooks and museums, and basically that's it. Because you can't print in a lot of these textbooks, multiple chronologies, because it just, it confuses too many people. So they sort of came down with this compromise, and that's what they use in museums. They use this compromise, but no one who knows their chronology accepts the middle chronology. So you do get a lot of these little side debates going on in chronology. But I think it's a rapidly changing field. It's a very, very rapidly... More has changed in chronology in the last 10 years than in the last 200. It's an extremely rapid... I've made advances to this particular field. Just after leaving university myself. So, and that was in 2015. So, that tells you how quickly things are changing in this field. Exceptionally fast. So anyway, that's the chronology I use, and that's the reason I use it, is because it's the only one that's really internally consistent. So thank you very much for the super chat. Okay. Moise Salazar for $10. Again, thank you very much for the super chat. I started to think that although that the Sumerians were the first to commit to writing the flood story, they didn't author. And Gilgamesh is a side story, not the main narrative. Yes, okay. I think I get what you mean here. Yeah, well, we have to kind of understand a couple things here about the sort of the Epic of Gilgamesh. The first thing is, Gilgamesh was a real person. He was a real person. He does appear on the king's list, and there is, I think, at least one inscription with his name on it. So it seems he was a real king. Now, did he do all the things ascribed to him in the Epic of Gilgamesh? Probably not. So we don't exactly know the relationship between when the Epic of Gilgamesh was written versus when he actually was alive. So it does seem that the Epic of Gilgamesh is the oldest retelling of the flood narrative. But it also, as you rightly point out, it's not the main part of the narrative either. It's sort of a tangential portion of this. So if you read the story of Gilgamesh, you get a lot more going on there than it's more about the sort of the quest for immortality than it really is talking about, say, the flood narrative. The flood narrative is almost like a throwaway. It's almost like a throwaway to the whole narrative. So there does seem to be some sort of at least the flood narrative seems to have been important enough to the authors of Gilgamesh that they included it in. Who knows why? I mean, maybe it is so it just didn't get forgotten. That's a possibility. But it doesn't seem to have that much importance to the overall story. So anyway, that's probably all I'll say about Gilgamesh because I haven't read it in a long time. But anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. Okay. Sean Horton for $20. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Do subtle self-references, at least to me, needed a commentary in the Bible. For example, Genesis having elements of the tabernacle in it. Genesis 5, Seth's birth, having language that echoes Genesis 1-2, imply how it was meant to be read. Yes, very much so. Thank you very much for the $20 and thank you for your super chat. But yes, I think we have to. One of the things about reading any text is you have to sort of read it thoughtfully, and Genesis is no exception to this. And what I mean by thoughtfully is you have to sort of be aware of. You have to ask the questions of the text that sort of pick up on literary themes, literary terms of phrase. Things that might have contextual value. Like, for example, Genesis 5 having elements of the tabernacle, but not just the tabernacle, but all sort of temple sacred space. And we do know that, like, for example, the early the early Hebrews, when they lived in Avaris, they were worshiping at the temple of Baal. So they knew what a temple was. They knew what sacred space was. They knew what idols were. So all that language is going into, say, the book of Genesis. So there is these sort of references where the author of Genesis is referring to itself through this imagery, through this contextualization. So we do get those clues. Now, the problem for us, the big problem for us, is we don't have that context. We've never, most of us have never been to a pagan temple. Okay, we have maybe a couple people in the live chat that have been to a pagan temple, but most people have not. Okay, so we don't have that context. So we're not thinking along those lines. Like, for example, when we read Genesis chapter 1, Genesis chapter 1 is organizing sacred space of creation. It's using language for the creation of man that they would have used for idols. God made man in his image and in his likeness. That image and likeness, those are terms that they used for idols, graven images. So when you read this, you are supposed to pick up on the religious imagery. That's the context. And anyone in that day and age would have. So, when we pick up the Bible today, most of us who are picking up the Bible today, we're reading it out of a Judeo-Christian context that's so far removed from Baal worship or from the temple of Yahweh. Or even the temples of Egypt. We're so removed from that context that we don't even think to read for that when we start reading these texts. But that imagery is definitely there. It's throughout the Old Testament. It's even in the New Testament. It's more Hellenistic in the New Testament, but it's still there. So, very, very important clues as to how to read these texts. Because you start reading Genesis 1 that way. You pretend you're a Baal worshiper in ancient Egypt, and you start reading Genesis 1. You're not going to get the idea of young Earth creationism. You're just not going to get that idea out of the text. What you're going to get is the idea that this is something religious, highly religious. It's highly religious, though, in that sort of late Bronze Age kind of manner. So absolutely, it should cue us. It should really sort of, when we read this, it should really sort of trip off triggers in our brain saying, hey, okay, we're supposed to be reading this a certain way. So definitely you're on the right track here. So, if reading a commentary helps, do so. That's why commentaries exist. Commentaries exist to help you appreciate the text more. And I highly encourage everyone to read commentaries. Commentaries are fantastic. Now, there are expository commentaries that are, how do I say this? They almost require a grounding in Hebrew or Greek. And they're incredibly useful for pastors. They are incredibly useful for, say, advanced lay people. But for people who've never had any exposure to Hebrew and Greek, they can be also a little bit overwhelming too. And sometimes you'll see them and you go, well, I remember when I was a layman, I would open an expository commentary and go, well, what use is this? What use is this preposition here, whether it's a dative or a genitive? I don't understand. I don't understand what use this is. So, I would flip through the commentary, and it was just like, yeah, it just isn't useful. It just isn't useful. It's just sort of minutia. Whereas nowadays, having Greek and Hebrew under my belt, I'll pick up an expository commentary and go, oh my gosh, this is just treasure. This preposition is so important because it's in the dative and not in the genitive. That's sort of the 2020 hindsight of education and experience. So definitely pick commentaries that are appropriate for your level, but definitely read commentaries. Commentaries are a wealth, and read new commentaries. Don't read the old ones. There's a temptation where people tend to buy really old commentaries, especially from like the 19th century, like the pulpit commentary. Don't read the pulpit commentary. Sorry. Read like Nikot, Nicknit. Baker has a good commentary. Word has a good series of commentaries, although it tends to be better for the New Testament and the Old Testament. So yeah, there's a lot of good commentaries. Also, here's another pro tip: avoid all-in-one commentaries. If it's the entire Bible in one book kind of commentary, pass it by. Scrap it. Matthew Henry is just one of the worst commentaries imaginable. It's a terrible commentary. If you're going to use a commentary, get one specific for the book you're reading. Okay? And as I said, there's a lot of good ones out there these days. Those live. I'll be the first one to admit commentaries are expensive, but the spiritual insight out of them is invaluable. So, expensive versus invaluable. That's sort of the option you have there as far as commentaries. But definitely avoid single book commentaries. Avoid old commentaries. They seem like a deal, they're not. That's because so much has changed in theology in the last 50 years. If it's older than 50 years, don't use it. Just plain don't use it. It's so out of date at that point, it's just not even worth engaging. So, anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. I know I kind of went on, waxed eloquently here about commentaries, but I think it's an important subject. I think it's a really important subject. And you did mention it, so, but I do encourage you to keep using commentaries. They're great, and they're a wealth of wisdom. You're standing on the shoulders of giants at that point. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. I very much appreciate it. Okay. Andrew Goulet again for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. You talked about the Jeroboam inscription in another show. Yep. We have a Monday release on. We did a Monday release several months ago on the Jeroboam inscription. Okay. Do you consider Jeroboam, which was the name for Gideon, to be the same as the name Zerubbabel from Ezra Nehemiah? I'd have to look that one up. But let's see here. Let's see here. What is the hero in Zerubbabel? Begotten in Babylon. No, it's not etymologically the same. It's Zerubbabel. Yeah, so it's Jerubal is a different etymology than Zerubbabel. Zerubbabel is Babel is the word for Babylon. Zeru means born there. Okay, so begotten in Babylon, essentially. Okay, so that's Zerubbabel. Now Jerubal means let Baal, the god Baal, contend with him. Okay, so they're different names. They're different etymologies. So I wouldn't consider them the same. I love the name Jerubal. I think that's just the greatest name. It's just like, especially that story too, where Gideon has burned the idols of the idol in the town, and everyone's angry at him. Because Baal's going to take vengeance on all the people, so they're angry at him. They go up to his father and he says, discipline your son. And the father goes, I'm not going to discipline him. Let Baal deal with him. And that's where the name Jerubal comes from. Is just, or Jerubal, or that's where it comes from. It comes from that sort of that funny sort of throw off line. And this is one of the reasons. Actually, this is actually one of the reasons why I think that the Jerubal inscription might actually be Gideon. And I think it might actually be Gideon because it's not a name you would give to your son if you were a Baal worshiper. Okay, it's not a birth name you would give an Israelite. It's not a Yahwistic name, so it's not a birth name you would give to an Israelite. It's a name that an Israelite would have to take on. It would not also be a name that you would give to a child if you were a Baal worshiper, because the last thing you want is your God to deal harshly with your kid. So, I just don't think that there's the options are getting pretty small there. So I do think I am leaning towards that being a name for Gideon. So at least that particular Shah Ostraga I think that was probably Gideon. Just, given the historical context, and also given the fact that, it's a pejorative. It's really, it was not meant to be a serious name given to a child. So, anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Interesting question. Okay. Josh Sketch Show for $20. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate that. Hi, Dr. Falk. What do you say about the evidence that Amenhotep Kupshef, the son of Ramses II, who should have died in the final plague from skull fracture by a mace, which is shown in his skull? Okay, now we had this question earlier on tonight. So I will give you because you did give us a very, very generous super chat here, we will give you the summary of that. Which was that we don't actually know if that skull actually belonged to Amenhotep Kupshef. Here's the issue. This is something not released in peer review. This is something that was released in a newspaper. And basically what the excavator speculated was it might be the skull of Amenhotep Kupshef. Now, they found the skull in a pit with the remains of 4 skeletons. Okay, none of these skeletons were complete. Okay, so it is sort of basically all you had is the maximal and cranium of that skull. So you can age it. You can get a rough age by tooth remains, by examining dental, features. But these weren't mummies that were wrapped, so there's no identifying markers on it. And Ramses II had 120 children. He had 120 children. They were all supposed to be buried in KV5. So it could have that skull could have belonged to any one of his sons, essentially. So we just don't know. We just don't know. Was this Amenhotep Kopchev? Was it one of Amenhotep Kopchev's stepbrothers from a minor queen? One who would have never been in line for the throne directly, but would have essentially had been one of the children of Ramses II, and may have even died before Amenhotep Kopchev. So we just don't know. There's also a problem with the dating of this too, which is that if it is Amenhotep Kopchev, there's some issue as to the timing of that death. Because the excavators kind of speculate that Amenhotep Kopchev went on campaign, got killed in battle, and was buried. Okay. And again, this is all speculation, but Ramses II's final campaign was in the 18th regnal year. The Hittite Empire, the treaty with the Hittites, Amenhotep Kopchev was still alive around year 25. So it couldn't be him. Now, many of the sons of Ramses II went to war. So it could have been, as I said, could have very easily been a son of one of the minor queens. So anyway, I hope that answers the question. And again, this is one of those questions where, Mr. Empty Conjecture, loves to rear his ugly head, because that's what we're talking about here. So, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate that. Okay. The Camel Leopard for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. What do you make of Robert Alter's translation of the Tanakh? Is it reliable? I have not read it. I have to be honest. I have read Robert Alter's book on biblical poetry, and that book is excellent. That book is really, really excellent. And it's called the Art of Biblical Poetry, and it's if you're going to read Psalms, if you're going to read a prophecy that's written in poetic form, you gotta get that book. The Art of Biblical Poetry is a phenomenal book. It will change the way you read biblical poetry forever. It's an absolutely phenomenal book. Now, I know that Robert Alter is a very competent scholar. He's a very, very competent scholar. But, there's more that goes into a translation, though, than just scholarship. Almost everybody who puts his hand to a translation usually has a pretty good understanding of Hebrew and Greek, and most are reasonably good scholars. But I would have to, for me to really judge that translation, I'd have to get my hands on a copy of it and read it for myself, and I just haven't done that yet. So, I think it might be very promising, but then again, too, I've seen some really good scholars produce some really garbage translations too. Eugene Peterson, great scholar, wonderful scholar. I would not use the message to save my life. It was just like, yeah, I got some issues with that paraphrase. So, but Peterson was an excellent scholar. So just because you're a good scholar does not mean you're going to produce a good translation. However, again, I'd say this. Definitely get his book on the Art of Biblical Poetry. Let's just say, life changer. Absolutely life changer as far as the book goes. You'll never read the Psalms or Proverbs the same again. All right. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay. Inspiring Philosophy for $10. Good to see you tonight, Michael. Great to have you here. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Oh, is Douglas Petrovich a great scholar or the greatest scholar ever? Bound sign Nephilim are Neanderthals. Also, what is your view on the sun standing still in Joshua 10? Oh, no. Oh, Michael's yanking my chain. Thanks a lot, Michael. Well, yeah, yeah, he's probably, I don't know. I don't even know how to answer that. A great scholar or the greatest scholar ever. I don't like black and white fallacies. I don't like the choice. Bad choice. Bad apologist. Nasty choice.
You reject the premise.
I reject the dichotomy. I want a third option. Okay. Now, as far as my view on the sun standing still in Joshua 10, it's omen language. It's omen language. The whole idea that the sun sort of sets in the sky and the moon doesn't move. This is all omen language, and it's more of an omen language that sort of is discussing basically sun and moon in opposition to certain celestial features. You know, it's a little bit sort of like the Star of Bethlehem. You know, the Star of Bethlehem is an omen. It's omen language. You know, when the Magi see the star in the sky, they're seeing it in a certain constellation. And that constellation gives them sort of a divine message of what to do next. We get these omen messages, you know, we see them in, say, Mesopotamian texts, where, you know, there's a celestial, you know, body going on. Like, for example, the Venus tablet is an example of, say, omen texts, where the observation of the star of Venus is to predict a certain thing that happens at that time. So we do get these omen texts. Now, I have heard it stated that this was a solar eclipse, and I know this is very popular. And I do reject this for a couple of reasons. One of the reasons I reject that particular reading is because the sun doesn't actually stay still in a solar eclipse. You can actually see the sun move in a solar eclipse in a way that you just would, you know. I mean, I've seen a solar eclipse. You know, just one of the most recent ones was the 2019 one I saw it. You know, and you know, you see it move. You see it actually move fairly dramatically. So yeah, I'm not buying that it's a solar eclipse. Second of all, if it were a solar eclipse, it would place the Joshua context way too late. Okay, it would be way too late. The only candidates for proper solar eclipses, and we have to understand too that, you know, in ancient times, it's not like us today. We can't see. The sun is such a bright object in the sky. I mean, it's a million lumen candles. I mean, it's just crazy how much light comes off the sun. For an ancient person to really notice a super eclipse, that has to be like a 96% eclipse. You know, partial eclipses often go unnoticed because of the brightness of the sun itself. So we do actually have some reports of eclipses in ancient literature. What's the one that comes to top of the head? Let's see here. There was one recorded in, let's see if I have it here. Yeah, there it is. Of Mercili II. He records a solar eclipse. Now, in the case of his solar eclipse, it dates to one of 2 years that are that are two dates that are actually within 2 years of each other. So it's generally I think it was either 1312 or 1314 BC that he saw that eclipse. But that's the rare exception where an eclipse can be really sort of pinned down. However, in the case of the Joshua narrative, the eclipse occurs way too late for it to be, for the Joshua, standing in the sun to be an eclipse, essentially. And frankly, as I said, it's using omen language. It's using the language of omens. This is a form of divination. It's really a form of divination. It's you're reading the sky, it's presenting an omen, and then you're taking a certain action based upon the omen. So the sky's not really stopping moving. It's not really stopping moving. What it is it's basically saying for the duration of that omen, you can have as much war as you want. So that's really more or less what it's saying here. So that's sort of my view on Joshua 10 and that particular omen. Okay? So it's sort of stopping the water clock. Okay? And they did have clocks back then, by the way. As well as, sundials. We do find, interestingly enough, in Egypt, we do find evidence of sundials as well as water clocks. So they were aware of the passage of time. Very aware of the passage of time. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. I hope that answers the question, at least the second question. The first one, I hate you for that question. Thanks a lot, brother. Okay, we have a super chat for $3 from Stephen O. I see your question right underneath it, so we'll take that. So I just started to read your read your book. The cherubim on the top of the Ark of the Covenant, are they snake-like, human, male or female, animal? How Egyptian do you think they look, and what form do they take in your view? Okay. Yeah, from all the iconography we have from ancient Egypt, the cherubim on the top of the Ark were, because they're facing each other, and we've got lots of examples of this in Egyptian ritual furniture, they tend to be female goddesses. So they tend to be human, they're female, and they do have their wings stretched forward. So if you want to kind of get an idea of what they sort of looked like, you could actually look on, say, there's several pictures in the book, like on the corners of the tomb, the sarcophagus of King Tut. There are several winged female goddesses that protect the sarcophagus. You can kind of see what they would probably look like in that case. So that's probably the best picture we sort of have of them. But they were used on several pieces of King Tut's furniture. So you can also see them on the bark reliefs of Ramses II, of Amenhotep III. They were used prolifically in Egyptian religious furniture. So they're human, at least in the Late Bronze Age. In the Late Bronze Age, they're anthropoid, they're human-like, they're female, and they do have wings attached to their arms. So, their arms stretched out with the wings basically being extensions of the arms. So that's, I hope, gives you an idea of what they look like. Now, I think the Israelite ones look very, very similar to the Egyptians. Okay, it's a very, very similar style. And the reason I say that is because we've now got several examples of iconography from Israel. And what we like, for example, the seal of Hezekiah uses Egyptian iconography. It's got a winged solar disk with 2 ankhs on each end. So the Israelites are using Egyptian iconography throughout their history. So it would really, really surprise me if the Ark of the Covenant looked, say, radically different from the cherubim, at least the mercy seat, looked radically different from the cherubim that we find in, say, Egyptian culture. Also, we also don't find anything that's analogous in the Late Bronze Age in Mesopotamia either. So, that sort of narrows it down as well a lot. So, that's... Later on in the Iron Age, you're going to, and particularly towards the end of the divided monarchy period, where you say get more Mesopotamian influence, the whole idea of cherubim are going to change. They are going to be, treated as more taurine, which means they're bull-shaped. They're going to have, say, the heads, different heads, like head of an eagle, head of a human, head of a bull, head of a lion, they're going to have like 6 wings instead of just 2, So a lot of this depends upon when exactly we're talking about in period of time of what cherubim look like. But I think definitely in the Late Bronze Age and, say, during the United Monarchy, which is Iron Age, they do seem to be more like Egyptian cherubim. So, anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, and then we have Jamie C here for 499. Thank you very much for the super chat. Just really thankful for you and your wife. Blessings to you, my brother and sister in Christ. Well, thank you very much. We can always use your prayers. Thank you very much for the super chat. It does really help us, and it helps our channel. We can really use all the well wishes we can get. One of the problems of doing a ministry like this is you do undergo periods of extreme discouragement, because even if things appear to be the ministry is giving you fruit, you are under attack constantly. You're under attack from forces of darkness. You're under attack from, say, atheists, and I'm not equating atheists and forces of darkness. You're under attack by fellow Christians. It does get discouraging from time to time. So, just hearing that you're thankful, giving us a note of encouragement is just so helpful. It's just so very, very helpful. So I very much appreciate the kind sentiments. Really, really appreciate that. Thank you so much, brother. Okay. Sentinel Apologetics for $2. Thank you very much for the super chat. You've been a huge blessing, also quite timely too. Well, thank you very much. Again, it's really great to hear that this is helping people. And frankly, when we started this channel, well, we weren't expecting much from it, to be honest. It was just at the beginning of the COVID pandemic. I had lost my job thanks to the COVID. Coof. Sorry. And I'd lost my job because of that. I was working as a frontline IT guy, and, the boss said, hey, we're laying off half the employees for pandemic. Bye-bye. And it's like, okay, well, nobody's hiring at that point, so what do I do? So it's like, okay, I got time on my hands. So it's like, okay, well, let's start this little channel on ancient Egypt and the Bible, and, I had put in, I already had a small blog already, but, really hadn't considered doing YouTube. Really hadn't considered doing YouTube at all. I wasn't good at cinematography or doing videos. Still not. I'm still not good at doing videos, but having a lot of fun anyway. Uh, but yeah, we've really been blessed by how it's grown, how people are responding to it, the diversity of people that are responding to it. We did a survey. We filled a lot of objections. People have attacked us sometimes fairly, sometimes unfairly, and it's something you have to develop a thick skin for, and we just love the work, and we love that it's helping people. So anyway, I want to thank you very much for that super chat, and I thank you for the encouragement. It's just really it's something we need, and I really appreciate it, and I really appreciate having support from other apologists like you. So I would encourage everyone else to also go and visit Sentinel Apologetics channel as well. So thank you very much, brother. There's another one from him. Okay, for Australian $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. All right, now let's have some fun. Okay. Thoughts on the Kenite hypothesis? On the solar ritual, numbers 5, a 2017 JSUB argues that the dust used was copper salts due to metalworking background of the Kenites. Okay. Let's see here. Numbers 5. What does he mean here?
Can you put it up, please?
Oh, yeah, sure. Okay, I have to, let's see, look up here, numbers 5, to see if I can see exactly what you mean by that. Let's see here. Dust. Where's this dust? Looking this up, I'm not actually seeing the Sotar ritual. You know what? You're gonna have to. I think you're gonna have to send me that paper so I actually have a little more context here to see what's actually going on. Because I don't have. Doesn't look like I have enough specifics here to really comment on this. So do send me that paper, okay? Send me the paper and I'll read it, and I'll give you my my opinion of it offline. All right. Because I don't think I can actually locate it here. So I did look through numbers 5, and I don't exactly see what's being meant here. So send me that paper. I'd love you've already got my contact information. So send it to me, and I will definitely take a look at it. But thank you very much for the super chat. Really appreciate it. Okay. Gregory Jack for $2. Thank you very much for the super chat. What are the 3 proofs for Israel being in Avaris? Okay. Okay, we have to kind of understand that when we look at, say, for example, the Exodus, we are dealing with a cultural context in the book of Exodus that puts it at a specific time and place. The first is that it's a Ramesside period text, and we get that from, say, the names that are used in the Exodus route, like, for example, Migdol, Paramses, Pithom. You know, these are names that are specific to the time of Seti I and Ramses II. Okay, now. The other thing is, when it talks about Genesis, I think it is Genesis, let's see here, the land of Goshen, we are told that Goshen, let's see here, we are told that when Joseph relocates his brothers to Goshen, he relocates them near him. Okay? Now, the context of the Joseph narrative occurs during the second intermediate period. The capital of the second intermediate period is Avaris. Okay, that's the capital of the Hyksos. So Joseph is located in Avaris. Okay, that's where he's doing his that's where he's doing his ruling as second in command over all of Egypt. So Joseph is located in Avaris. And we know Joseph dates to the second intermediate period because he's using a chariot. And these are basically enter into Egyptian warfare after 1666 BC. Okay? So we know where Joseph is located. He's located at Avaris. He settles his people in the land of Goshen to be near him. So it has to be Goshen has to be in a location near Avaris. Okay? The second thing is, the Bible also identifies the Goshen as the land of Ramses. Now, let me see if I can get that verse. Okay, and I think, yeah, okay. Genesis 47:11. So Joseph settled his father and brothers and gave them possession of land in Egypt, in the best of the land, in the land of Ramses, as Pharaoh had ordered. Now, Ramses here is a retrojection. It's a retrojection, and basically means this text was written long after the life of Joseph, but it's using the terminology of the time to help you identify where the land of Goshen was. Now we know from Egyptian records where the land of Ramses was. Okay? And it is around the cities of Avaris and Paramses. That is the ancestral homeland of the Ramesside clan. So the Bible is even telling us here that it is located, in Ramses' holdings, essentially. And we know those holdings were P-Ramses and Avaris. So, that's your second proof. The third proof is the fact that it's actually in the late Bronze Age, Avaris was one of the largest Semitic cities west of the Orontes. Okay, so it's bigger than Hatzor, it's bigger than Jerusalem. It's as far as population goes, it was 250 hectares. It could have held up to 200,000 people. It was a big city, and it was a Semitic city. The archaeology of Avaris shows that you had ceramic. Semitic ceramics used there. You had Semitic tombs, Semitic gods. It was a Semitic city. It was also a very cosmopolitan city, but it was primarily a Semitic city. Okay? So then, when we look at those sort of three aspects, Joseph, where he situates, his people near him, the Genesis 47, that Ramses, the land of Ramses, is Goshen. That the archaeology shows it is a Semitic city, and finally that it was abandoned during mid-Dynasty 19, which was during the reign of Ramses II. So it fits very, very well. It dovetails very, very well with the biblical narrative from Exodus, because we see from those toponyms that we discussed earlier that that abandonment of Avaris coincides with the Exodus route as we know it, as we would have known it at the time of Ramses II. And you really have only one major candidate for a city abandonment at that time, which was Avaris. So that is how we know that the sons of Israel came from Avaris. Also, we'd also know that, here's a fifth one, okay? We're just lining them up here. There's also a fifth, which is that the start of the Exodus route is at Pi-Ramses, okay? That's where the Exodus route begins. Pi-Ramses is the capital city, imperial capital of Egypt at that time, the time of Ramses II. And it's only 2 kilometers away from Avaris. So essentially what they're doing is when they leave on the Exodus, Pi-Ramses is on an island. It's on an island. So, they're not leaving from Pi-Ramses because otherwise they'd have to take boats across. So Pi-Ramses is on an island. But what they're doing is they're gathering on the field that's south of Pi-Ramses. And Avaris was 2 kilometers away, but it was also on the southern shore of the Pelusiac branch of the Nile. So they have, this is also a matter of logistics as well. They're taking the herds, they're taking their flocks, they're gathering outside in the fields south of Pi-Ramses, and then they're moving southward through the Wadi Tumilat to leave Egypt. So, in order to do that, you have to start already on the south bank, and the only city there that qualifies near Pi-Ramses is Avaris. So, I gave you 2 more than you asked for, but I hope that was worth it. Thank you very much for the super chat, and thank you for the question. Okay. RG Strategy for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat, and it's good to see you here tonight. Okay, when would you date the Hittite raid on the city of Babylon? I have books that dated to 1595 or 1531. I'd have to look that up on my chronology here, which is, again, Groundhog Chronology Laboratory. So, do I have early dates for... Yes, I do have early dates. So, let me see here. The Hittites defeat Babylon in... I would date that to 1568. That's where I would date it. Where... Mersili I defeats Samsu Ditana of Dynasty 1 of Babylon. So that's where I would put the terminus there is 1568. And it's plus or minus 5 years. Okay, it's plus or minus 5 years. So it sort of would be in the middle of that range. Okay. So that's sort of where sort of the computers have placed on Babylon. Now, granted, I still need to do more work on that chronology in my copious free time, and I wish I had more free time to work on chronology, because the more synchronisms I can get into this thing, the more accurate it will be. So it's by no means a completed work, but it's right now I just don't have the time to do. Boy, I wish I had, This is one of those times when you wish you were a research millionaire, and you didn't have to work for a living and could just do research. Because if I could just do research, man, the stuff I'd love to do. There's just so much stuff I'd love to do, but you're limited by time. You're limited by time, and the necessity to work for a living. So, but again, this would be one of those projects that I'd love to pick up again and just really sort of dust off and do more with it, because I think there's just so much fertile ground there for learning new things about chronology. And we have actually learned some amazing stuff about chronology by the Groundhog Chronology Project. For example, we learned that if you change chronology in one place, in basically one empire, it has a ripple out effect that you don't even notice for, say, until, 2 or 3 degrees of separation from the original change. It's really amazing how one small change in, say, to an Egyptian date can change things, and those synchronisms, they might be communicated, say, through, Ugarit and Hatti, and then goes to Babylon and Assyria, and then you all of a sudden get a inconsistency in an Assyrian date, just so far away from the original change. It's just we are just learning so much about how the method of chronology we have to be more attentive to the method of chronology, because there's just so much moving parts, so many moving parts. This is why so much I think more attention does need to be placed upon chronology. And I have to admit, one of the projects I was working on for a while was an actual textbook on ancient Near Eastern chronology. Because I think it's needed. I think we don't right now have a really good, solid textbook to teach even a graduate level class on chronology. So I think a good, solid textbook would be more in order. And I was working on it when I got like 150 pages in, and just couldn't continue it because of time constraints. So, but definitely, I think that the date I gave you, was it 1568? That's what I would go with as far as the Hittite conquest of Babylon. So thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Good question. Okay. Awesome. $2 super chat from Saahi Hethert-Newt. Good to see you tonight. It's always great having you on the channel. I love having you on this channel. Many thanks for feeding my caw weekly. Well, you got to keep that caw fed. You definitely have to keep that caw fed. If you don't feed that caw fed, well, bad stuff's going to happen, You want to keep that caw fed for the afterlife. We did finish filming that our video for the Egyptian afterlife, so that's going to be coming in a few weeks. We're really excited about this. The difficult part is going to be putting all the pictures together for it. I have to go into my photo archive and pull out as much photos as I can for this. But we're really looking forward to this one. We think this is going to be really exciting, and it was really good to sort of go through the whole like Book of Gates, and we try to do a balance between what's a summary of each hour in the Book of Gates versus there's a lot of detail in the Book of Gates, and unfortunately we can't address it all. We might sometime in the farther future, do a more intensive look on every individual hour of the Book of Gates. But for the purposes of just an overview of the Egyptian afterlife, we try to do a summary. So it's going to be really good. It's going to be really exciting. So, and I'm glad you're loving the channel. That just warms my heart. So. I'm glad your caw has been feasting, and very much appreciate the super chat. You have a great night. Okay. And the Camel Leopard for $2. Thank you very much for the super chat. In what year would you place Yeshua's birth? 4 BC. I think right now that's probably the best date. People have speculated between 4 and 6, but I think 4 is probably the better number here. So that would be the year. We can't narrow it down to month as much as we'd like to. It was sometime during the a season where they could travel, so it was probably outside, probably after the harvest, since it seems to have involved some sort of taxation. So there does seem to have been that it was after the harvest and before the rainy season. So where that falls exactly in the Israel calendar, I'm not really sure, but it does appear that that it was around 4 BC. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, Benjamin Vance for $20. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Thanks for your awesome work. Awesome. Wow. Well, you're most welcome. What is the best book to read about the Sea Peoples, and are they possibly related to the Hyksos? Okay, they're not related to the Hyksos. The Sea People are. There was actually. I'm trying to think. There was. I might have to get back to you on a book for the Sea Peoples. There is a textbook on the archaeology of the Mediterranean that I have a copy of, but I haven't looked at it in a long time. We don't actually have a lot of good published books on the Sea Peoples. I think there is this is something that we need more text to really actually do a productive book. We actually have more on the Phoenicians at this point than we do on the Sea Peoples. However, with that said, I think there was a couple books done on the Philistines that might sort of fill the gap. Now, we have to kind of understand here that Sea Peoples are not related to Hyksos. The Hyksos are Amoritic Semites. Okay, they're Amoritic Semites. They're essentially a people group that sort of wandered in off of the from northern Mesopotamia. You know, they were sojourners into Levant, and then they finally moved into the Nile Delta when, say, hunting and gathering dried up in the Sinai. So they're definitely Semitic. We know this because the names on some of the fragments that we've recovered from Avaris are they're Amoritic Amoritic imperfective names. Okay, so they're the sort of names that we find that's very, very common amongst Semitic peoples. Okay, now the Sea Peoples come from a different origin. They're essentially Indo-Europeans. They're Indo-Europeans. They are a bunch of tribal groups that are moving down from Turkey into Levant, and specifically along the coastal plain of the Levant. Now, the Indo-Europeans they have different language. You know, like Phoenician would be one of the languages they would be using. They are probably of Greek origin, or a combination of Greek and Hittite origin, and both Greek and Hittite are Indo-European languages. So it gets a little hard to differentiate. And there's not just one tribe of Sea Peoples. There's many tribes. Now, the Bible calls them collectively Philistines. But you have tribes like the Sherohen, the Luca, the Duden, the Paliset. You know, there's many tribes of Sea Peoples. There's not just one tribe of Sea Peoples, and they're just collectively known by the Egyptians as the Sea Peoples. So this is sort of a Egyptian name that we use for the Sea Peoples. But the Sea Peoples come in after the Hyksos, long after the Hyksos. The Hyksos were defeated around 1530 BC. We start to see the first glimmers, the first tribes of Sea Peoples. The earliest mention of them is actually in an Amarna letter. And that Amarna letter dates to around 1430 BC. Okay, so and that's the first, and that's an attempt by one of the Sea People tribes to infiltrate the coastal plain. So during the Amarna letters, the Sea Peoples are not in Canaan yet. They're not in the Canaan yet. But by the time of Ramses II, we're already seeing that some of the cities of Canaan have been captured by sea peoples. We find this in, say, like the Merneptah, the great Libyan victory stela, where the preamble is talking about various groups of sea peoples that are, part of Merneptah's conquest. We also see that, so, like, for example, so usually by 12, and we date, like, the Merneptah stela to roughly 1217 BC. So already by that point, sea peoples are occupying Canaan. And they're mentioned in some texts of Ramses II too. So by the time of Merneptah, they are firmly established in Canaan. So that's 300 years after the Hyksos are driven out. So anyway, I'll have to see if I can find some good materials on the sea people. I don't know if there's much of anything out there at the moment. If you see something maybe on the Philistines that's current, I know there's some old books on the Philistines, but they're not exactly the most current. Somebody should do something a little more current on the Philistines. It's something that's in need of more attention. I think one of the problems I have with some of the older material on the sea peoples, and particularly the Philistines, is that there's this sort of assumption in say, more biblical literature, biblical studies work, that the sea peoples didn't arrive in Canaan until the 1100s. But that material isn't taking into account the Egyptian texts. And it's clear that the Egyptian texts place the sea peoples earlier than the archaeologists do. So, and I have a theory why that is, which is that essentially I think the sea peoples are doing the same darn thing as the Israelites are doing, which is essentially conquering a portion of Canaan and occupying those cities, eating the food off of their tables, tending their vineyards, using their pottery. And it just takes 50, 75 years to start making their own stuff. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very generous super chat, very much appreciated, and I hope that answered your question. Okay. Jack Gregory for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. IP's video on the internal evidence for the New Testament. He goes through how the writers got cities right, named certain figures, prices certain items, etc. There anything like this for the Exodus? Actually, there is. Most, or I should say, many of the cities in the Exodus route have already been identified. Okay. Sukkot comes from the word Cheku, which is the Wadi Tumalat. Paramses was identified by Labib Habashi in the 1950s. Pithom, Tel El-Rataba. So we know where those cities are already. We have records that indicate Ramesside existence of Pihahirot, Balsafon, the Yam Suf, the Sea of Reeds, Migdol. So we've got lots of at least geographical evidence. We also have some customs, like, for example, the Egyptian custom of putting long cylindrical objects in the shoulder, in their basically a shawl that they wore around the shoulder. Now, this refers to the Israelite women who basically take their bread bowls, put it in their shoulder garments. This is very, very unusual if it was, say, a Semitic bread bowl, because Semitic bread bowls are low flat. It is very typical, though, of Egyptian bread bowls, which are long, tall cylinders. And they basically cooked these bread bowls upright in the cylinders. So, in order for that reading to make any sense, it has to be, there you have to be making Egyptian bread, or bread Egyptian style. We do find Egyptian names in the Pentateuch. Ahor, or her, comes from the word Horus. Let's see, who else? Potiphar, Poti-Ray, common Egyptian name. The price of certain items. You could say, for example, the price of Joseph as a slave. Kenneth Kitten did an article where he charted the prices of slaves in basically the ancient Near East, from I think something like 2000 BC up until like 500 BC, something like that. And he showed like on that the price of slaves gradually got more expensive over time. And he was able to plot that as being, say, right in, say, that Hyksos period. So like the price of slavery, definitely is a datable quantity. So there's, they get right. For example, at the end of the book of Genesis, when Jacob is mummified and buried, they basically said, he was mummified for 40 days according to the custom of the Egyptians, and then mourned until 70 days was complete. This has been recently confirmed in an Egyptian ritual. And I would point to Daria's Mummies, Myth, and Magic, which talks about this. A very great book, by the way, if you can get your hands on it. Hard to get now. Really hard to get now. But an invaluable book. It was originally a museum catalog. But, some of the best books were museum catalogs. So, we do find a lot of internal evidence in the Pentateuch that the Israelites spent some time in Egypt. You almost cannot avoid it, just because it's just everywhere. It's just everywhere in there, and it's culturally. It's the Pentateuch is rich with Egyptian culture. So, birthing bricks. The birthing bricks. We have examples of birthing bricks. From ancient Egypt, and basically women would stand on these bricks and give birth, and the extra gravity helped them out. So there's lots of these little details, lots and lots of little details, and I would recommend that if you want more of these details, do have a look at my series on evidence for the Exodus. I think it's at 9 parts at this point. It needs some more parts. It's by no means done. Yeah, people keep telling me there's no evidence for the Exodus. I'm not done. Yeah, no evidence, except all the evidence. Yeah, there's a lot of it there. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. Okay. And I think we're almost at the end here of the super chats. We'll take a couple of non-super chats. It is very late, however. So I do want to get a couple more non-super chats in. The Camel Leopard for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Follow up to my last question. When do you place Herod's death? I think you're talking about Herod the Great. I don't recall when Herod died. I seem to remember something like 2 AD or something like that, but don't quote me on this. I'm not really sure when Herod died. It's not something that I've looked at a lot. I'm an Old Testament guy. I'm really an Old Testament guy. So the further you get into the New Testament, I know some New Testament. I did my Masters of Divinity, where they basically give you a lot of New Testament, but I have to admit it's not as big of an interest for me. So unfortunately, I can't give you the date of Herod's death. It should be very easy to look up, though. I don't think Herod's death is really all that contested. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. I do very much appreciate it. Sorry I couldn't answer that off the top of my head. I do my best, but I don't know everything. So thank you very much appreciated. Okay. Yeah. Nathan John, about to hit the 3-hour mark. Ha ha ha. Yeah. Thanks. Thanks for your sympathy. Okay, let's pick a few more non-super chats and then we'll call it a night. There. I'm going to take this one. MJ. What does it mean that Moses was a god to Pharaoh? The text says, does a god to Pharaoh. Then the Lord said to Moses, see, I have made you like God to Pharaoh. Your brother Aaron will be your prophet. Okay. What he's basically saying is that the Egyptians believed that gods had the power of life and death. They had the power of life and death. Any god could be vindictive and kill you if you treat a god badly. And this is one of the things about Egyptian deities that you have to sort of keep in mind when you read a text like this. Is the Egyptian gods were unpredictable. They were capricious, very capricious, and dangerous. They were very dangerous. An Egyptian god would just as soon bless you as smite you. Okay? Just as soon bless you as smite you. Okay? And if you didn't treat the Egyptian gods right, they could be very ornery. Okay? So it was believed in Egypt that gods were not necessarily your best friends. So when Moses is told that God would make him like a god to Pharaoh, he's basically telling Moses that you're going to appear to Pharaoh like you have the power of life and death. Which, in a sense, he did. He did. He could call on the plagues. Then you had the Passover, where it really was life and death. So, that's what the passage means here. Is it's somebody who has the power over people's lives. This is why it also says, too, in the text, and I think it's chapter 12, when God does do the Passover, that this is a judgment over all the gods of Egypt, the killing of the firstborn. Okay? Because the firstborn, those are your heir apparents. These are the people who are going to be inheriting everything you have, all your power, all your influence, the lion's share of the inheritance. This is your power base. This is where your power, the posterity that's going to where your power is going. So the whole judgment over the gods of Egypt in the Passover by killing off the firstborn is essentially basically saying that God is going to kill all the people who have that potential for power of life and death. Basically the future, quote, little gods of Egypt that had power over life and death. Now, we also have to kind of understand, too, that the term God for the Egyptians is incredibly broad. It's incredibly broad. The Egyptians did not have a separate word for, say, angels or demons or various spiritual entities. They were all gods to them. Whether it's the big god Amun-Ra or some spooky little ghost hiding in a corner of your grain silo, they're all gods as far as the Egyptians go. So the idea of Pharaoh in the time of Ramses II was considered to be a living god. Okay, so it wasn't that sort of language was not uncommon in the late Bronze Age. Now, one of the things about Egyptian pharaohs was we have to keep in mind that the time when Pharaoh thought himself to be a god is actually pretty narrow in Egyptian history. It occurs from the reign of Amenhotep III right until the end of Dynasty 20. So it's basically half the Dynasty 18 and Dynasties 19 and 20, where you have the ideology of the king being a god. Up until Amenhotep III, kings were just god in potential, not god in actuality, until they died. After Dynasty 20, then you had the priests of Thebes going, "Oh, kings? Oh, they're no gods. They're just men." Okay, so it really happens in a very short period, a specific period of time. But it is during this time that we do see that that language of men being referred to gods, being in Egyptian culture, and we can see how that interplays with, say, the biblical text. So anyway, it's a great question. I thought I'd take it. Thank you very much for the question. Okay, we've had 2 more super chats come in. Let's see here. Okay. Linguist Emerald for $5. Thank you very much again, friend. Okay, my paper on the early date of the Pentateuch is because of the evidence towards a late Exodus and Richard Hess and his work on the Mari archives. Awesome. Cool. Is that the question, or is that you're just giving me some news? If it's news, it's great news. I love people. I love it when people are inspired by the work we're doing, so they do some of their own work too. We're trying to build a community here of people who are in love with ancient texts, whether you're Christian or not, in love with ancient texts, love with ancient cultures, appreciate religion as the ancients would have known it. So that doesn't matter if you're a follower of Kemetic Orthodoxy or Christianity or Judaism. These are all sorts of things that we can all appreciate. So I really want to get people, so, I don't want to, here's one thing I don't want to be. I don't want to be Clerical George up here answering everyone's questions, and when I die, the answers just disappear. I want people to learn this stuff. I want people to use this stuff with their friends. I want them to really sort of absorb it and make it part of their, say, devotional life, or part of their academic discourse, or just in their conversations at work. So I get really, really excited when I do see people applying knowledge, and this is applied knowledge. So I get really jazzed over stuff like this. So, by the way, if you are going to do the Mari archives, definitely get Jacques Sasson's book. It's excellent. It's really, really good. Somebody asked a question, I think a couple weeks ago, where would you read letters about Terra of Urkesh? And Jacques Sasson's book on the Mari archives is a very, very good book. It's published by it's Penn State. It was by Eisenbrauns, but Penn State I think bought them out. So yeah, it's an excellent book. I would highly recommend it, especially if you're doing work on the Mari archives. Wonderful book. Okay, and we also got another super chat from Converse Contender for $1.99. Thank you very much. Good to see you. Okay. Constellations seem very relevant to a lot of the ancient Near East. Yes, they are.
Part 2 is, sorry, I should have asked, and you give your take.
Part 2.
Underneath.
Oh, okay. Yeah, okay. Yes, they are. Okay. And the take is on the constellations. Now, they had their own constellations. They're not using the same constellations we're using. I mean, our constellations come out of, say, Greco-Roman mythology. Okay? So that is more or less the constellations that we're using today. We're not using, but the Egyptians had their own constellations. Invariably, the Mesopotamians had their own constellations. The Israelites had their own constellations, but they did have constellations, and they did perceive that events in the sky, omens, had a certain influence upon the people of this world. Now, it's not like modern astrology, where it's sort of kind of believed that the gravitation or the movement of the stars affects the events of our world. It isn't quite like that. It's more that they believed that stars and planets were spiritual entities. Okay? They believed that they were spiritual entities. So these are spiritual entities that are interacting with each other. And in that interaction, they are telling us knowledge that they discovered in other ways. So you do see a lot of omen texts. You do see constellations. You find constellations on tombs in ancient Egypt. And they're clearly, star patterns that are lined out in certain ways. Now, what those constellations mean, and what do they mean in certain conjunctions, while constellations are really, really important to the people of the ancient Near East, archaeoastronomy has been an abject failure. It's been an absolute abject failure. Archaeoastronomy is essentially the attempt to marry astronomy and archaeology. And almost every venture that archaeoastronomy has sort of kind of gone into, it's been a complete bust. And there's basically archaeoastronomy has tried to go down two avenues of inquiry. One, by trying to date ancient events by, say, by star records, eclipses, lunar months, and archaeoastronomy has not been able to successfully do that. And part of it, the reason is because ancient observers aren't that keen. If a like for example, this happened like for example during, say, Scaliger's attempt at his modern chronology, and he based his modern chronology, 17th century, upon, say, lunar tables, lunar records that he, that came in from the fall of Constantinople. Well, it was quickly pointed out that those lunar tables have a lot of errors in them. So many errors that they're functionally useless as a means of verifying a chronology. And it's the same lesson is repeated over and over and over again. Attempts to date, say, the ascension of Ramses II according to lunar observations. Again, those lunar observations are not accurate. Because they're not accurate, it could be. This is why people used to date the ascensions of Ramses II to, I think it was 1279, and it just based on lunar dates, and it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. It's terrible. But the other problem with archaeoastronomy is when it tries to show alignments with the stars. They'll take a monument like Stonehenge and align it to the stars. And the problem is, you can probably look anywhere in the particular sky and something will align with it. But it ultimately fails to ask the question, well, what does that alignment actually mean? What's the importance of it? Why are they doing it? Yeah, sure, okay, it aligns with the stars, so what? What did it mean to the people of ancient times? And nobody can answer. Those are very, very difficult questions to answer. Even in culture that has, say, as much religious literature as the Egyptians, very difficult to answer that question. in the case of, for example, say the rising of Sirius, the star Sirius, on the horizon at the in that particular case, the Egyptian texts do seem to indicate that that's associated with medicine. So the rising of the star Sirius was not used as for dating criteria. It was really used for saying, okay, this is the best time to take a certain medication. So there was some intermixture between medicine and astrology. However, we also know from those records too that the rising of the star Sirius is incredibly imprecise. So again, useless for dating, but the Egyptians weren't asking those questions. They weren't asking the questions of dating. So anyway, I hope that gives you some insight into what I think about the use of constellations in ancient Near Eastern literature. We do have references to constellations in the Bible, like Orion, I think, is mentioned in the book of Job. So it's there. It's definitely there, and it's definitely used, and it's even used by Israelites. So thank you very much for the super chat and a very provocative question. Okay, I'm going to take, because we have hit 11 o'clock, and I have not had dinner. So I am going to wrap this thing up. And I still want to take one more non-super chat, but I'm just going to buzz through the live stream here until I find something that's really provocative. Okay. I will take this one here. Brixie Mandels. And this will be the last non-super chat of the night, because I'm hungry. Who are the Shasu? That's what I think what you mean by that. And the one with the Yahweh inscription in Egypt. Thank you. Okay. The Shasu were tribes that lived in the land of Edom. So they were essentially on the southern portion of Canaan, near Mount Seir. They were tribes that wandered the Sinai, essentially, and they're dressed in very elaborate garb, very, very elaborate garb. We have lots of pictures of Shasu from Egypt. The earliest reference we have to the Shasu is in a biography that dates to Thutmose II. So they predate the Israelite Exodus, both late and early date. Now the one with Yahoo, and it's not Yahweh, it's Yahoo. There's no last H on this. This we don't know. We're guessing here. We're guessing. The problem is it's in a captive circle. So this was the Amara. We find the Shasu of Yahoo mentioned in two temples. One in Soleb in Nubia, and that one dates to Amenhotep III. There's another one in the Amara West Temple that dates to Ramses II or Seti I. Okay. Now, the big issue here is, what does Yahoo mean in this particular context? It is in a list of other tribes of Shasu. We do find at least 7 tribes of Shasu listed in these inscriptions. So it does appear to be that these particular Shasu it refers to a place. Okay, it is a place. Now, this is going to be the $1 million question, which is Yahoo named after a place, just a place that we haven't yet discovered within Edom? Is it a name of a god? Which It's possible. However, the other Shasu tribes that we find don't have any theophoric names. Now, we do find theophoric names in ancient Egypt, and one of the interesting things about it, like for example, Baal Savan. Baal Savan is Baal of the North. Interesting, in Egyptian texts, Baal Savan is written with a god determinative at the end. So we know here that, and the god determinative is the god Seth. There's a little picture of the god Seth, which they associate with the storm god Baal. So Baal Savan, we know, is a theophoric name because it has a theophoric character in it. It's got a divine character in it. Pihahi wrote. We do find that in the Egyptian text. Now, the very interesting thing about that is that has the goddess determinative in it. So it has to be a theophoric name, which is also very interesting. In the case of the Shasu of Yahu, we don't have any theophoric elements. We don't have any sort of symbols that show that it was a god. So, there's very, very much here a lot of controversy involved. And I think it's impossible to say one way or the other which one is it, which one it is. So anyway, thank you very much for the question. I actually am going to lie and take one more question, because there was one I think I saw. Let's see if I can find it here. Hope it didn't drop off. I think it was close to the beginning here. Okay, this one. I'm going to take this one from Slammer. All right, this will be the last question of the night. Okay. From Slammer N, good to see you tonight. I know you're probably off to bed because you have to work, but I thought I would just answer this this question, and I thought it was an interesting question. Do you think that Ankh-Senamun sent the letter to the Hittite king saying she was afraid that I killed Tutankhamun and forced Ankh-Senamun to marry him? Okay. Now, our knowledge of this comes from actually the Hittites. The deeds of Suppiluliuma I. And he calls the person Dumuzi. So, princess, essentially. And we do get the idea that and this comes to known from historians as the Dumuzi affair. And essentially, this letter was sent to the Hittite king, Suppiluliuma I, basically saying that, my husband has died, there's no heir to the throne, I'm being forced to marry, send your son, and he shall be king over Egypt. Okay? I think, given, say, what we know about, say, the life of Suppiluliuma I, the state of war that existed during the reign of Ai, and into the reigns of Horemheb, and even through to Ramses I and Seti I, that state of war didn't exist at the time of Akhenaten. We see from the Amarna letters that the Levant was, the Egyptians were collecting tribute, and they did not have any Hittite incursions at that time. That would have definitely have been noticed. So this is something that would have had to take place after the reign of King Tut, essentially. So I think Ankh-Senamun is the best candidate for being that Dumuzi. So, yeah, and it does. And she was forced to marry Ai, and we never heard from her again. That was the last we've heard of her. So, we don't know exactly what happened to her. We don't know what became of Ankh-Senamun. We don't know if she got assassinated or bumped off or, locked in a room. But we we do know that this was the flashpoint that caused the Egyptian-Hittite War. Was that, Subbi-Lulima first sent a son. Not one of the top sons, but, one of the younger sons. He sent him off, and Horemheb was out and killed him. Horemheb went out, he was a general, went out, killed him, and in the meantime, while Horemheb was off to war, I, the wily old bird, married Ankh-Sunamun, buried King Tut, and took the throne while Horemheb was on campaign. And it's only after that we get the flashpoint happen for the Dumuzi affair and the war. So anyway, that is going to be our final question for the night. I want to thank everyone who joined us tonight. It was a great Q&A session. Lots of good questions. Lots of interesting questions. Lots of well wishes, and we always appreciate those. I want to thank everyone tonight who donated a super chat. You do help us keep going and help this channel continue to produce the content it does. We also want to thank our Patreon supporters. They help us with the equipment upgrades and when things do eventually break, and they do break. But I want to thank our Patreon supporters who've been really, really helpful and, again, don't get as much credit as they deserved. So I want to thank everyone who is with us tonight. And I'm glad you were here, and this was a lot of fun. And I will see you next time on Ancient Egypt in the Bible. Good night, everyone.